something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast. We just had something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast.
Hello.
We're covering a very serious subject this week. That of animal mutilation. And not just even animal, but possibly people too.
Yes, it makes sense that if animals have been mutilated, why not humans? Especially if it's paranormal.
So, to begin the subject, let's just talk about the certainties of it all. Everyone that's investigated this in any country has found it to be occurring, so it sounds like it's global. There's tons of photographic evidence of this. To deny it is ridiculous. Mainstream media's the idea that Linda Howe makes this stuff up is ridiculous. She doesn't go around the country murdering cows, sucking all the blood out without leaving any footprint. I mean, that's ridiculous. This is definitely really happening. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
In rural areas, it's encountered by people because very often it's livestock. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to wild animals, but the simple truth is, if you found a dead deer with no eyes lying, you just think the birds pecked it out. You wouldn't have any reason to think it was suspicious.
Yes.
But because this is done to livestock, farmers obviously encounter it hours, minutes after it's happened, sometimes during, possibly. But we'll come on to that. So that's how it intrudes into the human consciousness and still managed to be covered up. It's still a laughingstock in most people's minds.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, I bought a joke UFO with a cow toy.
Yes, I've seen that, yes.
I mean, it's still a laughing matter. But to some farmers, it's happened 5 times. America or Australia, where these places are a million cattle. So it is in the consciousness of some people, particularly in North America, Australia, and the rural areas of Europe. They nearly always go unnoticed.
They are mostly in rural areas, the isolated farmlands. When farmers discover these things, it's not like they can just call the police and they'll turn up in 5 minutes, or they can call their neighbour and they'll come over. They're all isolated, quite insular. Very difficult to get someone to actually investigate this properly. So I can understand why a perpetrator would pick a rural area to do such a heinous act. It makes sense that you will unlikely get caught, and after the act occurred, you will have enough time to get away.
But these perpetrators are not afraid. Some of these cows are found 200 yards from the farmer's house. A farmer with dogs in the house, and nobody hears a thing. Literally, these things are so stealthy. They are unafraid in almost any circumstances. In terms of livestock, there are never any footprints. There's no tyre tracks or marks of any kind. There's nothing appears to have landed. The grass is completely undisturbed around the animal very often, although sometimes there appears to be evidence of animal being dragged in other parts of the field, or even the adjacent field, which is a very odd part of the...
Yeah. I believe a lot of reports, when they are reported, are usually a professional, a veterinarian professional will come and assess the situation. One of the outcomes from the reports always seem to say that there's no sign of predation, no sign of a predator such as a wolf or a bear or something that would live out in the wilderness coming in, attacking the animal and carrying out these acts. So we can rule that out, that these aren't naturally occurring.
There's no blood.
Yes.
Which in a cow, there should be 10 litres of blood.
For the very least, yes.
We're talking about a situation that is completely impossible. If you shot a cow with a blunderbuss or an elephant gun, there'd be a lake of blood.
Absolutely.
There's a tiny residual bit of blood found around the nose or the mouth, and that's it. So these things are exsanguinated. They are drained of blood during this process. So we're either talking about vampiric wolves, very, very big ones, or
a serial killer with high technology to stealthily remove a large animal, completely gut it and carry out multiple operations on certain parts of his body.
He's never seen.
Never seen.
No tire marks.
No. There's no physical
no
evidence
sound.
of someone being there other than the animals themselves.
The cow was found 200 yards from a house. With dogs, I mean, surely 200 yards, a dog would hear anything.
Well, these dogs aren't just normal dogs, they're working dogs. They're there to protect the animals in most cases. They're there to protect their territory. So they're usually running free. And a dog is very, very highly sensed to hear noises, unusual smells.
Absolutely.
Anything a dog will pick up. I can guarantee that after having so many dogs, they would go off for a noise a mile away if they really heard.
So either these things, that something is dumbing their senses, or it literally makes no noise. So it paralyses the cow of making any startling noises or anything somehow.
Just to go back on that case of dogs, if we look at the case of Skinwalker Ranch, where they used animals as test beds, there were many instances of dogs being alerted to paranormal events, and the dogs would not end up in a very good condition afterwards, either pummeled to the ground, smashed into pieces, or completely disappeared. Usually dogs sense a presence of some sort, but a lot of cases they don't sense them. Maybe because they're locked in the house, maybe because it happens a distance away that they might not pick it up.
The majority of these things happen overnight, by the look of it, but not all. There's no sign of the animal being drugged. The cuts made are so precise, they leave most veterinary surgeons utterly dumbfounded and probably quite jealous. The lips, tongue, eyes, reproductive organs are all removed, as well as the anus. So it might not be necessarily related to reproduction. After all, those are all places where things go in and come out.
Very true. Just to go back on the point of the incisions and the cuts, more detailed research was done on that, and they found that the cuts were so precise that they were going between cells. They weren't just knife marks, that the cuts was that precise that they would go between the cell of that cut. Now I'm talking microscopic levels. This is reports that we've heard from Linda Bowl-Howell.
Yes, Linda Bowl-Howell, yes.
For something to do that, we don't have that sort of technology, and we certainly don't have that technology to bring out into the field. You'd need to perform that level of operation in a very, very high-tech environment with laser cutting tools and so forth. It has to be that precise. These cuts are not just something a serial killer would do, or some butcher or an animal. These are precise cuts specifically targeted to certain parts of the body.
So what you're saying is there is nobody in the recognised world capable of making cuts of that kind? Would a high-level plastic surgeon have this?
Yeah, there are high-tech cutting tools around to precisely cut items, and for obviously laser surgery and so forth. The medical industry technology moves on leaps and bounds. There are laser cutting tools within the medical arena that can carry out those performance of operations.
So this isn't impossible for people on Earth to do. It's just extremely difficult. So, in other words, this isn't an individual.
No. And it's not some sort of weird guy that has a massive truck with an operating room in the back of it, which he can just drag any victim into, precisely cut out pieces he wants, and then dump them.
Right. Okay. Now that's an interesting point, because there's also often signs that the animal's been dropped. Maybe not necessarily dropped, but its legs are quite often broken or dislocated. But if it's alive at the point of some of this, I mean, it's possible that that's due to some sort of trauma. I mean, if someone cut my tongue out while I was alive, I don't know what would happen to me.
I dread to think what the experience of that would be like. The poor creature would probably not know what's hit them, but we hope that's the case. But if they did, if they were conscious and awake when these procedures were being carried out, God only knows how that would have gone.
That's a true sign of real indifference to emotion and suffering. So then we get on to more complicated parts of this. Is very often the test results, the post-mortem, which are normally very, very reliable. Farmers depend on these things all the time. Things like BSE, foot and mouth disease, they have to know what's killed an animal, and so does the government.
Yes.
But in these examples, these test results never seem to come back.
Inconclusive, or just don't come back?
Just don't come back. So something inside of authority is aware of something that has to be covered up. I can't think of another phrase to use. Repressed. So they don't give a false answer that could be overturned. They just don't give an answer.
Yes.
So somebody has to arrive with your local vet and say, don't send that one. Give it to me.
Yeah, that's very concerning if something like that was going on, because for them to want to avoid that question being asked, what would you be hiding, and what could that conversation possibly lead to?
But who could do that? What kind of identification could you hold up and say, I'm sorry, that's classified information? Only MI5 or similar.
CIA, yeah.
One of those kind of people. No
Absolutely.
one else could do this job.
No one else has that authority to
GCHQ, NSA, no one else could show up with an identification card and just say, we're not doing it the way we normally do it this time.
Yeah, give me everything you got.
If your boss did that and you were a veterinary surgeon or a personal authority, you'd say, what are you talking about? I can't do that. This has to be somebody that would override any idea of authority you have. It just says, not this time.
Yeah. And have the capability to threaten action against you of some sort, to ward you off of even thinking of whistleblowing or
even maybe offer a reward to go along. I don't know what. If someone came up to me and said, "Oh, just take this person's password," or "We want you to delete this system off there," what would you have to do to get me to do that? I don't
exactly,
because that's the whole.
That's your whole career over.
The ethos of your business is being crossed.
Yes.
Your profession is being undone, especially if you're a vet or a doctor.
Absolutely.
You know, your job is to cure and you're being told, no, sorry, we're not going to look into this.
It just goes against your ethos as a doctor or as a medical professional.
After that, you would know something incredible had happened that you weren't allowed to talk about.
Yeah, it must take some doing to persuade someone not to reveal any information that could lead to a better understanding of what's going on. And the fact that we don't understand after so many years, this has been investigated since the 50s, 60s, these sort of mutilations, and we've not really had much of an outcome from it at all, have we?
No, and none of this suggests that it's terrestrial or otherwise.
Yeah.
There's no evidence. They could be covering up something they don't want to acknowledge because it would start mayhem.
It leads to questions, that's the problem. It leads to more questions. What people will naturally lead to is, well, if they're doing this to cows, what other animals are they doing this to? Are they doing it to us? And that is the question that we need to understand.
Why can't they stop them?
Exactly, why can't they stop them? You've got the biggest military budget in the world, but people are still able to come and massacre your cows.
And your people, maybe.
And your people, maybe. Yeah.
It does lead to a lot of questions. Now, we'll come on to who, what, why in a bit later on, but the other half of this situation is the lesser known half, I think, is the urban cat mutilation issue. Now, I had no idea of the number people were talking about before this, but just to go over what happens with the cats. Once again, they are exsanguinated, there is no blood. Half of the cat is often never found. So you literally wind up with the front or the back of the cat and the rest of it's gone. All the organs are gone from inside. Like the front half, it's like a glove puppet. You know, there's nothing in it. It's completely empty. Once again, this is in the middle of cities, London particularly. No one sees anything. How's that possible?
Having lived in London for many years, both of us have, I think, you know that there's not 1 inch of real estate in London that hasn't got a pair of eyes on it.
Or a camera.
Or a camera.
We're talking about finding a cat. I mean, where do you find a cat? You find a cat on a pavement or in an alleyway or in a garden. Well, not that there's many gardens in London. But you get down to find a cat without anyone seeing you at all. You manage to take it somewhere. It doesn't make any sound. You cut it in half, suck out all of the blood, all of the organs, drop what's left on the ground, and nobody hears or sees anything or gets anything on CCTV in London.
It would be interesting to find out and to research a little bit more into that, in the fact that have people reported seeing their cat 1 minute and then an hour or two later finding the carcass. That would be interesting to find out. It would be interesting to find out the time period between the cat being noticed as being missing and the body being found. Some sort of correlation between that and the cow. Because there's more investigation, obviously. The cow mutilations have had a lot more investigation put towards these cat mutilations.
If you found half of your cat one morning, a clean slice, like a guillotine had come down and cut your cat completely in half, and sucked everything out of it, would you just go, oh, it must have been a fox? I mean, would you really?
No. If there's no sign of predation there, then obviously There's no fox that will leave a clean cut line or just the husk or the skin of a cat. They'd eat the lot.
Also, the noise would be unbelievable.
Oh yes, the cat is not the quietest of creatures.
I mean, when there's a cat fight outside, quite often people open the window to have a look.
Yeah.
You know, that's not happening in this situation. It isn't a and suddenly someone looks out the door and there's a cat being cut in half by some means or other. These things, whatever happens, is completely stealthy, completely discreet, completely silent, and somehow must render the cat instantly dead, or I don't know what else it can do. But whatever happens, the cat doesn't react. It just wakes up dead.
Yeah.
And then incredibly clean cuts, no evidence of anything. There's nothing under its claws. It's literally like it went from being a normal cat to being half a hand puppet.
Even if there was the possibility of someone kidnapping that cat, taking it away from the original location, performing these acts and then dropping it back off, at some point in the line of that process, someone would have seen something. And they would have reported something. Someone would have reported this crazy guy's just dropped a bag of half cats out of the back of his car, or some crazy guy. I saw some guy trying to kidnap a cat, and I heard the cat screaming. You know, there's no reports of that, and that's very odd, especially in London, because there's a lot of nosy people in London that will want to know your business, because everyone's on top of each other in that town.
But also, there's cameras everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, okay, a lot of those cameras wouldn't be particularly effective at night, perhaps. And let's face it, cats go in some pretty odd places.
At night.
Yes, at night. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, a cat is the perfect prey for this.
Yeah.
Because quite a lot of time, you think about how often you see a poster on a lamppost saying, missing cat.
I see them every day. Even round here where we are, I see them every day.
So, what's happened to that cat? Cats are pretty resilient animals. I mean, they find their way home.
And I'm going to be honest with you, my cat has gone missing before and I never found it. This obviously runs some sort of parallels with the cattle mutilations. What do you think the commonalities of these would be?
Is there a crossover? Well, first of all, of course, there's the exsanguinated blood.
Yes.
There's no blood. However, this doesn't seem to be the same process as with the cow, because it's not the eyes, the anus, and the genitalia, and the mammalian gland and stuff like that. They take half of the animal. Presumably they take half of the animal because they basically want everything inside of it, which almost to me seems odd that you'd even discard the other half.
Yes.
Because it's just
the whole
evidence.
thing, yeah.
Exactly. Now, they don't take the mouth or the nose, so it's not so much about what
the respiratory
cat,
system
the
or
cat is
digestive
taking
system.
in or excreting.
Yeah.
This is a different why they're doing it, obviously. Because let's face it, we don't even know what they're doing.
I mean, the only parallels I can make with to the mutilation side of it with the cat is that serial killers usually have calling cards and calling signs, and they would leave some sort of indication of this is what I did, and leaving half a cat kind of fits into that. Where that runs into a big problem is that the volume of cats that have gone out and been found like this.
We're talking about 6,000 cats in a 6-year period in London. Now that's a lot of cats.
That's a lot of cats.
Now, the biggest problem here is the blood. I mean, the cat doesn't have a lot of blood, but you would know if someone had cut it in half with a sword.
Yes.
I don't know if we'd manage to get a sound out, but it might do. But the simple truth is, if you were wandering around London with a samurai sword and a bag full of half cats, someone's going to see you. You know,
You're going to get caught.
The half cat warrior is just, it's not feasible. So one other thing I think these cases have in common is there doesn't appear to be a vehicle involved. There's no way you could fly any helicopter, even if you had a flying saucer, you couldn't fly into the middle of London, pick up a cat and get out again without anyone seeing you. That is impossible.
Unless it's the usual of London where it's a cloudy day. We can't see it above the
you never get down low enough, and people see the cat going up into the sky or something. It's just not possible that you could get 6,000 cats in 6 years out of London unless you are so small that no one ever sees you. That you could go right past them and they'd never even notice. Or maybe you're just invisible.
You're cloaked. There have been many cases of cloaked, disguised extraterrestrials. Even UFOs are known to be cloaked, so we can't, or have some sort of camouflage that molds them into their background or whatever.
Right, so that's already going down an extraterrestrial explanation.
That's the explanation that I'm trying to think that could possibly tick all the boxes of how they evade detection. You have to be extraterrestrial to evade that sort of detection. In the case of the cows and in the case of the cats, there's no way.
I don't know. That's well, at least not with. In terms of disclosed technology on Earth, theoretically that's true, but we don't know that that's true.
No, we don't know that. This is all speculation, of course.
What I'm saying is, it's not impossible for it to be terrestrial with capability of that level. They're just not people we've encountered. They're certainly not people who are governed by the same people as us. That is one thing I think we can safely say. These people don't vote.
No, they certainly don't need to vote.
They don't pay
because
taxes.
They're already in power.
They don't pay taxes and they don't vote.
Yeah.
There's two things I can tell you about them. Apart from that, this is some sort of biological or testing, or it's not about predation. It's too exact. Why would you want all of the blood and the organs? Why? You wouldn't eat it all, would you?
Well, sorry to go down the road again, but if you were an alien and you had a delicacy of eating half cat, or cow eyeballs or cow lips.
But surely if you put it on the dinner plate, you'd want to have the front half of it. Just to sort of like leaving the head on the fish.
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems odd to me, but it just has a sort of sense of some sort of biological research, or maybe some sort of
biological
monitoring.
Research would never ever leave half the subject matter on the floor.
That's the most intriguing part of all of this. That's actually the other thing that this has in common with the cows.
Yeah.
Whoever's doing this doesn't give a fig whether we know or not.
No.
They just couldn't care less. They can't even be bothered to hide what they're doing, because they leave a cow with no lips, bottom, genitalia in the middle of a farmer's field. They don't bother flying away and dropping it in the sea.
No.
So he just thinks it was
Hiding
rustlers.
it, or, yeah.
Or even just
covering it with a branch or something like that.
Yeah, just turning it to dust.
Yeah.
They just can't be bothered. As soon as they're done, they just drop it, and that's exactly what they do with the cats too. It's almost like it's a little bit, don't forget we're here.
Yeah.
We kill you at any time.
Perhaps it's some sort of messaging.
It's just a very odd message. But then again, like Arnold Rimmer says, you're not thinking alien.
Yes.
It's a fascinating point. These perpetrators have no concern with what we believe whatsoever. They are completely indifferent, not just to us, but the people who govern us. They couldn't care less.
So the lack of decency in these crimes or these mutilations goes to show that the individual carrying them out has no concept of what decency is in a human terms. Because if a human or a sect of humans were doing something like this, there would be more signs pointing towards that.
I don't know, if you think about something like factory farming, when they kill a pig, they don't worry about what the other pigs think, do they?
No.
They have
They have
absolutely...
them lined up and they kill them in front of each
Exactly.
other.
They have absolutely no concern. So maybe they're no different to us. They're just a little bit more higher up the food chain, if so to speak.
Which is worrying.
Because as far as they're concerned, we're like cats. Quite literally.
Well, that's, I think, more nice, to be honest.
So, okay. It's a very difficult set of conclusions to move on to, because what we need to deal with now is a couple of examples of moving on from what happens to how does it happen. Now, I've got a couple of examples here that I know you're aware of, but I'm going to just go through them briefly. The first one is actually a 31-year veteran cop in, I think he was in Minnesota, and this particular case we're talking about happened across the border in Kansas. Apologies if I said the wrong state for Minnesota. Now, he found out about this at like 4 o'clock in the morning, drove for 3.5 hours, got there at 7:30 in the morning. By 8:30, he already had his metal detector out, a good metal detector. He's used it for years, swears by it, and he tested the area around the cow, found nothing. Now, you can set this metal detector, tune it for different levels of conductivity for various different metals, and he had it set up for like gold, platinum, that kind of part of the periodic table. So he found nothing, but then when he scanned the cow, he found platinum. It went bing on its nose.
Okay.
And the two of them, I think he was with a pal of his that had driven over them, and they were incredibly confused by how platinum could be in the nose of a cow. So they went back to his car and tested it on the sample platinum they had. It was working fine. So then they went back to the cow and tested the nose again, and it gave nothing. But as he scanned over the cow, it went bing just under its eye. And then he was tracking this thing made of platinum. He tracked it to the ear hole, and when he looked into the ear hole, he saw what looked like a sort of platinum pellet, but glowing blue. Like blue-white, like electric blue-white.
Yeah, that story is insane, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, one of the uses of platinum is in highly corrosive, high voltage environments where you can't afford for the cabling to be damaged. Now, people obviously are hypothesizing that this, whatever it was, ran on extremely high voltage. Now, is that possibly how they do the surgery? With basically a
like a remote
blowtorch.
drone, like a remote drone that they insert that's so small that it can work its way through the
Plasma
victim's
cutter.
body and extract the necessary
Basically
parts.
using lightning.
It kind of fits the hole that we're missing in regards to a silent killer that does precision cuts and insertions into an animal and extracts. The problem is the extraction part. Where does it take it to?
Where does it go?
How does it take a whole eyeball if it's smaller than a thumbnail? How does it take a whole eyeball out of something and then drop it where it needs to
remember,
go?
this is 4 hours afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's possible that this drone, or whatever it was, had been left behind. If it was still under positive control by whoever ran it, why? I mean, they could have done anything to that policeman.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't. It was almost like it was malfunctioning or lacking control. I mean, is it possible that this thing is a drone for a larger vehicle and the vehicle somehow left it behind?
Or they got caught in the middle of doing.
Maybe that's what happened. But would they really care? It doesn't sound like they did. We'll hypothesise about that a little bit later on. The reason I wanted to bring that one up specifically is that the other case I was going to mention was a farmer. He was in a field and one of the cows was behaving oddly. It was kneeling down and he heard a noise like plasma, like a zzz, like a arc welder, you know, sort of noise. And when he looked around to where the noise was and looked back, the cow that was on its knees in front of him was in the other field being dragged along to this bizarre sort of sound. He described it as the cow being tortured, being dragged along in terrible pain. He didn't witness a craft. He didn't witness any perpetrators.
But he saw the cow moving.
But he saw the cow being dragged along.
Invisibly.
Invisibly.
That's insane. So that would suggest that this cow was actually in the process of being mutilated and the aliens were in the process of moving it to another location. For some reason, I don't know why they'd want to move it. And then the action starts.
Well, it's interesting. So first of all, the first thing interesting to me is the sound he's talking about. This idea that it's a sort of which is possibly high voltage electricity.
Or a signal.
One of the uses of platinum is in high voltage cable. Is it possible that the platinum lozenge is how they do the cutting? That it's some sort of like a plasma cutter operating under really high voltage, and somehow or other it's remote control inside. But none of that explains to me why the cow's moving.
It might be due to a signal issue. We're aware that they need to move the cow to a location where the plasma drone is doing the cutting, could extract the samples at once and then transport it to where it needs to transport it to.
Right. So that's the other thing, of course, is that this little lozenge thing is presumably incapable of containing all of the blood and the matter from the cow. So it must have to take the cow either in proximity of a bigger craft or they've got some other way of doing this.
Well, they have to
entirely.
transfer the physical samples from the cow that they're extracting it from to the craft for experimentation, I would have thought. And if that is not done in a physical manner, whereas you are physically collecting a vial of blood or an eyeball in a jar and taking it up to a craft, you are transporting it there.
Do you think it really could be like literally like Star Trek, where they
Just beam it up.
literally beam it up?
It would suggest that due to the fact that these operations are carried out very quickly, there's no sign of blood, so kind of there's two theories that there's no sign of blood. Either, like we said, the operation is carried out at another location and the cow is left, or the operation is carried out there on the spot, but everything, every bit of the contents and every part of the sample is immediately beamed up into the craft, so you would never have any residue left over, because it...
Why wouldn't you just beam up the cow?
Well, these craft aren't very big. These beings tend to be a little bit smaller. I guess you physically don't have the room, and
It's perplexing one, there's no doubt about it. So there's a couple of extra bits to add. First of all, people report seeing black helicopters a couple of weeks before whatever this is goes down. Now, I've tried to find a better explanation. Nobody can tell me if it's like a Lynx or a Apache or a Chinook.
They're Bell helicopters. The old Magnum PI ones, that sort of thing.
Really?
I think they're always the same sort of. They're quite the same design, but I suspect that these helicopters aren't military at all. I suspect that these are projections,
Right, but why project anything?
because they want to get closer in without being recognised as a spacecraft. So why not disguise yourself as a helicopter?
Okay, there are people talking about the idea of incubation in these situations. Now, we were talking about the idea, of course, they're taking lips, tongue, liver, in other words, all the sort of parts of the animal that take stuff in, and then the anus and everything, where the waste comes out, and all the blood, which transports everything in between, of course.
And sexual organs.
Yes. In other words, they're taking everything that is had immediate effect from the environment the animal's in. That's one possibility, that it's like a monitoring thing, that there's a possible why. The other possibility is it's like they do in industry, where they inject an animal with something, leave it for a couple of weeks to incubate and the antibodies to come about, and then come back and take that blood. Now, both of those I find extremely compelling as far as a real reason why you would do this. Why you couldn't do it with a ranch full? You see, the incubation plan, the problem with the incubation theory is that you could do it with your own ranch.
Yeah, they can make a whole as many cows as they wanted
Exactly.
to genetically modify whatever they want within that cow.
So
and
that
then,
makes me think it's more to do with monitoring.
yes, it suggests that. I
You know,
agree.
and then of course we can come on to the cat problem.
The commonality between the cats, the cows, and I think it was
The horses
deers,
and deer too,
and humans.
and humans is the prion.
Yes, it is.
The folded protein that basically disrupts the nervous system until you fall to pieces inside. Now, let's just say they were monitoring against whoever they could be. Are they monitoring to create it, to improve it, or are they monitoring to protect us, to prevent it?
I would have thought we've been farming animals and there's been animal husbandry between these species of animals with humans for millennia, of a very long time. So I would have thought if they were trying to use it as a weapon, we would have seen the results of that by now. There must be some sort of monitoring, some sort of preventative measures being undertaken by the beings or whoever these people are. I don't think it makes sense to use it as a weapon and have it in plain sight like that. If you're going to use it as a weapon and you want to disperse it between the animals we ingest, i.e. cows, or the animals we have as pets, i.e. cats, or horses, or venison, whatever it is, surely you would use a biological weapon for that rather than infect the foods. Are you using it as a weapon, or are you using it as a tool to instigate some sort of change?
Or are they just farming so much of it that they could literally put it in the air or something like that at some point. Okay, we can speculate about that, but let's just bring in the behaviour of whoever's doing this. These people do not bother to fly the cow out over the ocean and drop it. They just drop it where it is. They don't give a fig about who realises what's happened. These people are following an almost robotic way of achieving this. They literally don't give a fig about who sees them, which makes me wonder about the black helicopter thing as being, if you were doing it for subterfuge, why wouldn't you hide the evidence?
Because you don't want to hide the evidence, you want to send a signal. But do you really want to send a signal? I mean, what signal are you sending?
I just think whoever does this has either made an agreement, so that literally they wrote down an agreement to the exact letter of the law, and no one ever mentioned you've got to hide the evidence at the end, and so they just don't do it. I mean, that's one possibility. Because if you think about, why would you bother with the black helicopter thing? Let's just say that they really are doing monitoring, and they put some sort of entity into these animals 2 weeks before, which is why they use the black helicopter deception thing. And then 2 weeks later, that whatever that is has performed data into the blood of somehow, something they can remove, and they come back and get it 2 weeks later. They don't bother making it look like it was struck by lightning, or making it look like it was eaten by predators. They just suck it up, drop it, bang. It even breaks its legs on the way down. Why?
But that isn't the case every time.
It doesn't seem to be a complete MO. It's almost like it's dysfunctional.
Yes, it seems almost psychotic, like some sort of serial killer that trying to send some sort of sign for people to, hey, this is what happens when you interact with us. We cannot assume to know the thought pattern, the thought process that goes into these mutilations, and if they have any intrinsic meaning other than we just see the results, and the results to us are horrifying, whereas to them it's an experiment or it's some sort of...
It's no different to a laboratory rat.
Yeah. We don't know how they're thinking or their mindset towards this.
A little bit of speculation more we can do. Are they the same people or the same entities? The people with the black helicopters, time and time again, they're here a couple of weeks before. You know, that would obviously push the incubation idea. But why bother with a helicopter? I mean, people hear them. They appear to be helicopters. Why bother with the helicopter if you're really in a UFO and you don't give a fig about them finding the cow after you've incredibly expertly removed some bits of it and removed all the blood with no footprints, no nothing?
Why go to that extent to be...
The subterfuge, the helicopters, is not the same MO as dumping the cow in the middle of the fields.
No, it's a fair point. But you can only speculate, that's the problem. You know, we are looking at it again, like I say to you many times, this is our mindset of common sense. Why would you do this? Why would you...
But the helicopters are indicative of something. It's not just speculation. The helicopters are indicative of either people flying helicopters
that know a
or
pattern.
people pretend to fly helicopters. Either way, that tells us something about who the perpetrator is.
I think it's the former. I think that there's a pattern, that there's a element of the government that know there's a pattern of these things and they know when to expect it. So they kind of recce the area out where they suspect these craft and aliens will be, follows on from them doing similar acts in the past. There must be a pattern that they're following. They must understand that these are the types of cow they normally go, and they normally do it at this day of the month. So let's see if this is the right sort of pattern that we're picking up. Or we can only speculate. That's the thing. That's the problem with this whole issue.
Okay, well, let's just say it was the government, a government of some sort, or some sort of earthbound authority. Couldn't you put something in the cow that would really squish aliens over if that was the case? I mean, why couldn't you...
You know, they could probably sense all these sorts of different genetic differences, or an infected cow from an uninfected cow. They are leaps and bounds ahead of us technologically, and I suspect that their understanding of biology and genetics are way beyond ours as well.
So surely they couldn't be predicted.
Patterns could be predicted, conditions could be predicted.
It's such a headbanger, this. Okay, so we're getting towards the why part, the process here. This thing is massive. It is the clearest and most obvious evidence of a one-world desire to cover up every aspect of UFO operations, all terrestrial and non-terrestrial. Completely obvious evidence, indisputable, I would argue. It's very interesting to me that Bigelow, his investigation of all this, he came up with this prion idea and he printed it. A lot of people say that Bigelow's just a shill and all the rest of it. Maybe he's been compromised since then. But it's such a sound theory on something that's so difficult to
Put your finger
put,
in.
even come up with a theory about, that it seems unlikely that it's that far wrong. Whether it's monitoring to protect or incubation of, it doesn't matter. It still covers the lips, the tongue, the liver, the blood. It still covers all these ideas. What could be the why? So the first motivation we've got is the mainstream media. They are being instructed to pretend these are sexual deviants, lunatics, cults, devil worshippers. They'll say anything.
But aliens.
Apart from the possible idea, well, I mean, not even aliens, but the possible idea that somebody has taken all the blood out of an animal, even though that most farmers, if you sat them down and took them through all the facts, they'd go, you're right. It couldn't have been a bunch of vandals. They know this. They know how much blood is in a cow.
Oh yeah.
The situation these people are finding is totally inexplicable in terms of a bunch of loonies with knives. No one is ever caught. They occasionally arrest someone for a bit of press, but no one's ever charged.
No.
It's always, I had nothing to do with it. Of course he didn't. How could he possibly have achieved that?
Yeah.
There's no, you're never going to make that stick.
But the level of expertise required to do the operations carried out alone mean you have to be a specialist to do it.
Well, and the blood, I mean, the whole cardiovascular system would collapse. You've got to have some incredible technology to keep all the veins open to get all the blood out. So, why is the media being told to come up with we could say that's just to protect people from panic, essentially.
Because logic would suggest, if this is happening to animals, the next question is, does it happen to humans?
Right. I think you've hit it exactly on the head.
Really?
The idea that there are people being found in the middle of Brecon Beacons or wherever,
Russia.
with no blood, no lips, no eyes, a lot of inner organs missing, no arse. I mean, it's not a good way to go. An entity or powers that are completely unstoppable, it would appear, or close to, who can basically fly over a hiking destination and suck all your blood out.
And they're malevolent forces.
That is impossible for them to allow us to know about. They could never allow that, even if it's been happening for millennia.
Society would then collapse. That's the only thing I think in regards to disclosure that would lead to society collapsing, in the sense that our governments have known about this sort of instance happening to human beings and they've done nothing about it to protect us. Society will then completely erode its trust in the government bodies.
Let's face it, they can't admit the truth, so they have to come up with any story. Okay, fair enough. But then we go a step further up the power tree to the people telling the media not to. So they want to stay in control. The question is, I think we're both fairly convinced that they've got a lot of interplanetary technology behind the scenes, but they don't seem to be able to. I mean, there are reports, of course, of people using infrared technology and looking up into the sky and seeing battles at night. But if we have that kind of defensive capability, how the heck are these things getting down here? I guess one slips the net, but that doesn't seem to be some of the reports. I mean, it all comes down to, like, for instance, if you think about the sort of people who've come out allegedly of the special forces saying, oh, it's a worldwide thing, we know when it's going to happen, we're sent out there to collect it.
They're allowed to come down, aren't they, really? It ties back to your earlier statement where you're saying that we've come to some sort of agreement where we will let them come down and do their experimentations. We assume they're experimentations or their bloodlust mutilations. Let's hope it's not the latter.
Or, they come in, attack in formation, while another one's as a decoy while one slips. They show up in the Pacific and it's a decoy while one slips in and cuts somebody up in Wales or something.
Yeah.
I mean, how easy would that be to fight against? It'd be pretty tough. The surface of planet Earth is a big place to protect people from.
It's a mass volume of land and sea. And it makes you wonder whether all those people that went missing at sea, have they all really gone missing?
Or whether they just got
beamed up and mutilated and
then dropped in the water, and then the sharks had them.
Yeah.
Looking back at having been on boats and stuff before, it's the perfect place.
Yeah, it's a perfect place to murder someone and get rid of the evidence.
Okay, so we'll just talk about a couple more folklore-y elements. I mean, if we think about something like the Dyatlov Pass, of course, some people say there are similarities. People were found, one of the girls was found without the inside of her mouth was gone and her eyes were gone, whereas some of them just appeared to be frozen to death. Do you think there's any possibility that was a...
Well, I don't think there are any real official reports from the police on these things, on motive and who did it. A lot of these cases, these people that have been mutilated have gone off the missing persons list completely, and they're just never to be found. They're just missing people and no one reports on them.
But in terms of the injuries that were seen of people at Dyatlov, of the missing eyes, I mean, to me, I think that's totally explainable, just in terms of...
That's the first thing wild animals eat, or the
Well, I think the birds would have taken the eyes.
Yeah.
I also think that it could have been foxes or something, Arctic foxes. And I think basically what happened to those guys is they set fire to the tent, and they had to cut their way out in the middle of the night, and then they realised they were going to die, and some of them made the best of it, and some of them went nuts. Yeah, I mean, you could usually tell in an autopsy how those missing pieces of body were removed. Were they surgically removed, or were they hacked away, or were they eaten by wild beasts? Yes.
Predation.
Looking at the photo, the only person that looks possibly, and I've never seen those photos in other coverage of Dyatlov, the pictures of that girl that I've seen touted by mutilation people, I've never seen with anyone else. So it's one of those things. I mean, I haven't seen all the photographs from the case, but I don't know. I'm at best on the fence. I don't think that was a mutilation. I'd need some convincing.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are some cases in Brazil that are a lot more convincing in terms of lip removal, anus, no blood, breasts for girls, testicles for the fellas.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about something that appears to be the same MO. Now, of course, Linda Moulton Howe is completely against the idea that this ever happens to people.
She's been told to shut up about it.
Something like that, because when you look at the evidence, it doesn't really stack her argument that it's Agent Orange. I mean, that's just ridiculous. How could it be Agent Orange in Brazil?
Yeah. The traces left behind by Agent Orange and the symptoms of Agent Orange do not explain the actual missing body parts.
Exactly.
And it just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense at all, and
it's irrational.
We have to, of course, come back to the fact that that's the reason that mainstream media don't go anywhere near this.
Yeah.
It's because there's just too much evidence. I mean, just imagine if there was a couple of stories in the news and people started posting, because let's face it, if you found a cow mutilated like that and you had no reason to believe it was anything other than loonies, that's what you believe. You wouldn't think, oh my god, it must be a UFO.
Yeah, that's not first on your list, is it?
So just imagine how many people would start posting, going, look at this.
Yeah, they've done it again.
You know.
Yeah.
And then, it just takes a couple of people to be found, and then you've got mass hysteria.
Yeah, so you need a clean-up team for these people, obviously.
Absolutely. That's what some people claim to be. Now, do you think there's any point in speculating if any of this ties up with the sort of chemtrail idea? Do you think they're putting stuff into the air?
Well, there have been video evidence of aliens releasing some materials outside of their craft, and I think Gary Nolan has been known to be experimenting on these ejections of material, and there tend to be molten metal and some gases. And the way he's described it is that they are metals that we know of, but the way they are chemical, the way they are structured, is very odd. It's like a byproduct of something. So that's one thing. I mean,
chemtrails, waste.
It's a waste of some sort.
Right.
Chemtrails, I can't really pass comment on that because I don't know enough about chemtrails to know. Obviously, there are theories that chemtrails behind aircraft have something in them that's mixed in the fuel.
But it seems very unlikely to me because, let's face it, a Rolls-Royce engine has got stuff being sent back to Rolls-Royce every second.
Yeah.
Place, temperature, time, RPM, you name it. They know everything. If somebody was putting something weird in that fuel, Rolls-Royce would know.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people you have to get. Don't worry, fellas. And it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't fulfil insurance. Wouldn't fulfil health and safety. And quite simply, Rolls-Royce would just say, "Look, we're not having any part of this because our engine's going to start blowing up and people are going to pick us off."
Yeah.
So I just don't see how that's possible. Is it possible that some planes have some sort of capsule attached and release stuff? It's possible,
but unlikely. I mean,
but,
these things are checked.
I don't think it could be an airliner. If any of this was happening, it would have to be dedicated military craft.
Yes,
and,
agreed.
You know, at the end of the day, surely if they wanted to do something that secret, they could use much better craft than their craft. They could use something much higher level, much harder to spot.
I totally agree with you. I cannot believe that a civilian airliner would do that. Having family that are pilots, I know they would have said something if they saw some canister at the bottom of their aircraft that they didn't have any recognition of, and some weird guy filling it up with this vial of fluid. I'm sure he would have known, my father or my brother would have noticed something along those lines. So it doesn't make sense.
So whatever we can say, I think whatever these things are monitoring, they're not monitoring the air.
No. No.
I think that the incubation theory is still possible, but it's got something to do with, we've got to face the idea that the reason they're doing the cats is for urban data, and the reason they're doing the cows is for rural data. And the deer, of course, which they do for like sort of in the middle of the woods, forest kind of data. So this is some sort of information gathering at some level. But then we've got the problem with the idea that some people report the animal the human mutilating people as not necessarily the same MO, that literally they have whole body parts like arms and legs. This sounds like a different type of thing, a different mentality.
There's reports of beings being skinned, bodies being just skinned alive, missing the eyes or so forth.
Like Predator style.
Like Predator style, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's where the idea originally came from. And limbs being lopped off, surgically removed. It kind of veers away from the usual mutilation MO, where this is more to do with, sadistic sort of.
Do you think it could be food?
Perhaps. But that's where your theory of different beings would probably possibly carrying these things out.
Yeah, I mean, whoever these things are that just sort of seem to be chopping people up in the worst way possible, it just seems to be a totally different way of thought. It might even be that one is a cover-up for the other. I mean, who knows? Or at least one is, I don't know, sparked by the other as an idea. If you can see how they are doing that, going down there getting data. But the other problem with that thing is, of course, sometimes it happens to very old people, which you would have thought would be the tastiest of people, So the idea that it's like a delicacy, I find that very hard to believe.
Lamb and mutton.
Exactly, mutton dressed as lamb. I find that very hard to believe. I don't know what this whole other sort of MO is of lopping off arms and legs.
And how can you? I mean, how can you relate? I mean, fine, we eat meat, but we don't go out there and drain the blood or take specific pieces of that animal out while it's alive. How can we relate to how this is being carried out, the mindset of why you do it? We're not scientists, so we're not going to experiment that way. Human scientists, I'm sure, don't experiment that way. So it's very difficult to take a position, and you can only speculate because it's just so odd. And it's been odd for many years.
So that's it. I mean, in terms of why, we've got nothing.
No.
We've got the prions, which I think is extremely plausible, but doesn't explain everything.
It's a coincidence, yes.
The BSE sort of mentality part, there's definitely some of these people are monitoring prion disease. Definitely some of them are. Whether they're terrestrial or extraterrestrial, well, the whole story about the sort of, they're trying to get ready and trying to monitor stuff, we don't even know if that's a psyop or not. I mean, it's a great psyop if you're doing it yourself.
Exactly, it's a great cover.
Because, there's a base over there that's got stuff that comes out of the ground in the middle of the night. who's going to find out about that? You know,
how
it's
could you possibly?
super high security. You're never going to find out. It might just be a load of nonsense. You know, these guys, are they sharp? They've got military ID. Well, if they were misinformation agents, that'd be the easiest thing in the world for them to have military ID. You know, can we trust any of that? Can we trust the idea that there's teams that go around the world picking up these remains? I'm on the fence.
Same here. I can't. There's not enough circumstantial evidence to garner to get a good position on this, because
it's such an easy thing to make people believe.
Yes.
You just need a couple of MI5 guys.
And there's no real motive. That's the problem.
I totally agree.
There's no real motive
whole
for
mop-up
it.
thing. I mean, it would be just as easy to make up stories about nutters about the humans.
It's easy to put a human in place of the aliens.
If you found a girl with no breasts, no anus, no sexual organs, no lips, no eyes, in the middle of the Brecon Beacons, you wouldn't think, oh my god, it must be aliens. You'd think, oh my god, it's a serial killer. And
it's a serial killer who's left the body and the predation has taken its toll.
Exactly.
That's what you...
A serial killer, that would be any... So why not do that with the... It almost makes you wonder if there's something terrestrial in the nature of this. But it's so weak, it's hardly worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all we can say about this.
I think case closed on this one.
Case closed.
Till next time.
See you next time.
We just had something go right over the top of us that looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast. We just had something go right over the top of us that looked like